Breaking right now. Federal agents have stormed a Minneapolis judge's private estate in what sources are calling one of the most shocking corruption cases in American history. This isn't just another raid. This is a sitting judge. A man who sentenced cartel members. A man who decided life-or-death cases for immigrants and drug dealers. And tonight, investigators say they found something that changes everything. Over $100 million in cash. Weapons. Encrypted communication devices linked directly to the Sinaloa cartel. The same cartel responsible for flooding American streets with fentanyl. The same organization that has killed thousands. And the man who was supposed to stop them? He was working for them. Doors kicked in. Safes cracked open. Evidence bags filled to the brim. This goes deeper than anyone imagined. The question isn't just what they found. It's how long this has been going on. And who else is involved. The call came in at 4:17 a.m. ICE field agents and DEA tactical teams assembled outside a sprawling estate in Edina, Minnesota, just miles from downtown Minneapolis. The property sat behind iron gates. Security cameras lined the driveway. Tall hedges blocked the view from the road. To neighbors, it looked like any other luxury home in one of the Twin Cities' wealthiest suburbs. But federal investigators had been watching this place for months. And what they knew made this morning's operation one of the most explosive raids in recent federal law enforcement history. The target was Judge Marcus Welland, 52 years old. A federal immigration judge with over a decade on the bench. A man who had presided over thousands of deportation hearings. A man who had sent cartel members back to Mexico. A man who had ruled on asylum cases, drug trafficking cases, human smuggling cases. And according to federal prosecutors, a man who had been secretly working with the Sinaloa cartel for at least 6 years. The raid began with precision. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just heavily armed agents in tactical vests moving through the darkness. They breached the front gate at exactly 4:21 a.m. Within seconds they were at the front door. Battering ram ready. Commands shouted. The door splintered open. Agents poured inside. Guns drawn. Flashlights cutting through the dark hallways. Every room cleared. Every corner checked. Judge Welland was pulled from his bedroom in handcuffs. His wife screaming. His teenage daughter crying in the hallway. Agents didn't stop. They tore through the house like a hurricane. What they found in the first 30 minutes was enough to make veteran agents stop in their tracks. In the master bedroom closet, hidden behind a false wall, investigators discovered a steel safe. It took nearly an hour to crack it open. Inside, stacks of cash. Shrink-wrapped bundles of $100 bills. Agents started counting. 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. The numbers kept climbing. By the time they finished, the total reached over $42 million in U.S. currency. All of it untraceable. All of it hidden in a home that belonged to a federal judge. But the cash was just the beginning. In a detached garage converted into a private office, agents found 3 laptops, 2 encrypted satellite phones, and a burner phone still warm to the touch. Forensic teams immediately seized the devices. Preliminary analysis showed communication logs with known cartel operatives in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Messages discussing shipments, payments, court cases, names of informants, dates of upcoming raids, locations of safe houses. Judge Welland wasn't just turning a blind eye. He was feeding intelligence directly to one of the most violent drug cartels in the world. The investigation into Judge Welland didn't start overnight. It began 18 months ago when a low-level cartel courier was arrested in Minneapolis. The man was carrying over $200,000 in cash and a list of names. Most of the names were street-level dealers. But one name stood out. A federal judge. At first, investigators thought it was a mistake. A coincidence. But the courier kept talking. He described meetings, payments, favors. He said the judge had helped cartel members avoid deportation. Had tipped them off about federal operations. Had delayed hearings to give smugglers time to move product across the border. The FBI opened a quiet investigation. They didn't alert other agencies. They didn't tell the court system. They watched. They listened. They built a case brick by brick. Surveillance teams followed Judge Welland for months. They tracked his movements, his phone calls, his bank accounts, and what they found was a pattern. Every few weeks, the judge would drive to a warehouse district in South Minneapolis. He would park behind an abandoned building. He would meet with a man in a black SUV. The exchanges were quick. Envelopes handed through car windows. Sometimes the judge received cash. Sometimes he received instructions. And every time the surveillance teams took photos. Financial analysts dug into the judge's records. On paper, he earned a federal salary of around $200,000 a year. Not bad, but not enough to explain the luxury cars, the private school tuition for his kids, the high-end vacations to Cabo and Cancun. His credit card statements showed purchases at designer stores, expensive jewelry, a Rolex watch, a new BMW. Investigators estimated that over the past 6 years, Judge Welland had spent over $3 million more than his salary could support. The money had to be coming from somewhere. Then came the breakthrough. A wiretap on a known Sinaloa cartel lieutenant in Arizona picked up a conversation. The lieutenant was talking to someone in Mexico. He mentioned a judge in Minneapolis. He said the judge was on the payroll. He said the judge had helped them move over 500 kilos of fentanyl through the border in the past year alone by delaying deportation cases and releasing detained smugglers on technicalities. The conversation was recorded, transcribed, handed over to federal prosecutors. That was the smoking gun. Back at the estate, agents kept digging. In the basement they found a second safe. This one was smaller, tucked behind a wine rack. Inside, investigators discovered documents, ledgers, handwritten notes detailing payments, names of cartel contacts, dates of court rulings. One ledger showed a payment of $5 million in exchange for dismissing a deportation case against a high-ranking cartel enforcer. Another entry listed a $2 million payment for providing advance notice of an ICE raid in South Minneapolis. The evidence was overwhelming. Upstairs, in a home office overlooking the backyard, agents found something even more disturbing. A wall-mounted map of the United States. Red pins marked cities across the country. Minneapolis, Phoenix, Los Angeles, Houston, Atlanta. Each pin represented a location where the Sinaloa cartel had operations. And next to each pin, handwritten notes. Details about federal operations. Names of undercover agents. Dates of planned raids. Judge Welland wasn't just helping the cartel in Minneapolis. He was part of a nationwide intelligence network feeding information to one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. The scale of the operation became clearer as agents continued their search. In a locked filing cabinet, they found copies of sealed court documents, immigration files, deportation orders, asylum applications, all of them marked with notes in the judge's handwriting. Some files were flagged with the word, protected. Others had dollar amounts written in the margins. Investigators realized that Judge Welland had been selling sensitive information for years. He had access to the names of informants, the locations of safe houses, the identities of undercover agents, and he had been handing it all over to the cartel. By 8 a.m., news crews had started gathering outside the estate. Helicopters circled overhead. Reporters scrambled for details. Federal agents set up a perimeter and refused to comment. But inside, the investigation was accelerating. Forensic accountants began tracing the money. They found shell companies, offshore accounts, properties registered under fake names. One account in the Cayman Islands held over $18 million. Another account in Panama showed regular deposits totaling over $12 million. The financial web was enormous. DEA officials confirmed that the investigation extended far beyond Judge Welland. They believed he was part of a larger corruption ring involving multiple officials. Early reports suggested that at least 3 other individuals were under investigation. One was a customs officer at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Another was a deputy sheriff in Hennepin County. The third was a lawyer who represented cartel members in federal court. All of them had connections to Judge Welland. All of them had access to sensitive information. And all of them were now being watched. At 9:30 a.m., federal agents transported Judge Welland to a secure facility in downtown Minneapolis. He was booked on multiple charges: conspiracy to distribute narcotics, money laundering, bribery, obstruction of justice, providing material support to a foreign criminal organization. Each charge carried a potential sentence of decades in federal prison. Prosecutors made it clear that this was just the beginning. They planned to bring additional charges as the investigation continued. The connection to the Sinaloa cartel was undeniable. Wiretap evidence showed direct communication between Judge Welland and cartel operatives in Mexico. One intercepted message detailed a plan to smuggle over 2,000 kilos of cocaine through the southern border. Another message discussed a payment of $10 million in exchange for dismissing deportation cases against cartel enforcers. The messages were explicit. There was no room for interpretation. Judge Welland had sold out his country for cash. The impact of his actions was staggering. Over the past 6 years, Judge Welland had presided over more than 4,000 immigration cases. Federal investigators were now reviewing every single case. They wanted to know how many cartel members had been released because of his rulings, how many dangerous criminals had avoided deportation, how many smugglers had walked free. Early estimates suggested that at least 200 cases were compromised, 200 individuals who should have been deported, 200 people who remained in the United States because a corrupt judge took a payoff. The human cost was even worse. The Sinaloa cartel was responsible for flooding American communities with fentanyl. The DA estimated that the cartel's operations had contributed to tens of thousands of overdose deaths across the country. And Judge Welland had helped them do it. By providing intelligence. By protecting their operatives. By undermining federal law enforcement. Every decision he made had consequences. Every ruling he issued had a body count. The raid also uncovered evidence of violence. In a locked drawer in the Home Office, agents found photographs, images of cartel executions, bodies dumped in the desert, messages written in blood. The photos were disturbing, graphic, and they raised a terrifying question. Was Judge Welland being blackmailed? Or was he a willing participant? Federal investigators believed it was the latter. The evidence showed that he had initiated contact with the cartel, that he had requested payments, that he had actively sought ways to help them expand their operations. This wasn't coercion. This was greed. By noon, the total cash recovered from the estate had climbed to over $100 million. Agents had found hidden compartments in walls, fake air vents stuffed with bills, a storage unit rented under a false name containing another $20 million in cash. The sheer volume of money was staggering. It represented years of corruption, years of betrayal, years of a federal judge enriching himself while American communities suffered. The weapons cache was equally alarming. In the basement, agents found a locked gun safe containing over 30 firearms, AR-15 rifles, Glock handguns, a sniper rifle with a high-powered scope, boxes of ammunition. Some of the weapons had been reported stolen from federal armories. Others had serial numbers filed off. Ballistics experts were now running tests to determine if any of the weapons had been used in crimes. The presence of military-grade weaponry in a federal judge's home was beyond comprehension. The encrypted communication devices told their own story. Forensic analysts cracked the first satellite phone within hours. The message history revealed hundreds of conversations with cartel leaders, discussions about shipment routes, payoffs to border agents, plans to assassinate informants. Judge Welland had been in constant contact with some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. And he had done it all from his home in suburban Minneapolis. The fallout was immediate. The chief judge of the immigration court issued a statement suspending Judge Welland indefinitely. Every case he had presided over in the past 6 years was now under review. Defense attorneys across the country were already filing motions to reopen cases. Prosecutors were scrambling to determine which rulings needed to be overturned. The legal chaos was unprecedented. One corrupt judge had compromised the integrity of an entire court system. Politicians reacted with outrage. Senators called for hearings. Members of Congress demanded accountability. The Department of Justice announced a full investigation into judicial corruption. Questions swirled about how Judge Welland had been able to operate for so long without detection. How had background checks missed the red flags? How had financial audits failed to uncover the money? How had a federal judge working for a drug cartel gone unnoticed for 6 years? The answers pointed to systemic failures. Federal judges had limited oversight. Financial disclosures were minimal. There was no routine monitoring of personal finances. No regular audits. No checks and balances to prevent corruption. Judge Welland had exploited every gap in the system. And he had done it brilliantly. Until now. Community leaders in Minneapolis expressed shock and disbelief. Immigrant advocacy groups condemned the betrayal. For years they had sent vulnerable families to Judge Welland's courtroom. They had trusted him to deliver fair rulings, to uphold the law, to protect the innocent. Instead he had sold them out. He had turned the courtroom into a marketplace. And the price had been paid in human lives. The Sinaloa cartel's reach into American institutions was no secret. For years, law enforcement had known that the cartel was infiltrating government agencies. They had bribed border agents, paid off local cops, corrupted customs officials. But a federal judge was a different level. This wasn't some low-level bureaucrat taking a few $1,000s to look the other way. This was a man with the power to shape lives, to decide who stayed and who got deported, to determine who faced justice and who walked free. And he had used that power to serve the cartel. Federal prosecutors were building a case that could reshape how corruption was prosecuted. They planned to argue that Judge Welland wasn't just guilty of bribery. He was guilty of treason. He had provided aid to a foreign criminal organization. He had endangered national security. He had undermined the sovereignty of the United States. If convicted, he could face life in prison. Some legal experts suggested the death penalty could be on the table. The investigation didn't stop at the estate. Federal agents executed search warrants at Judge Welland's bank, his accountant's office, his lawyer's office. They seized financial records, tax returns, wire transfer receipts. Every document was being analyzed, every transaction traced. Investigators were determined to follow the money all the way to its source, and they believed the trail would lead them to the highest levels of the Sinaloa cartel. In Culiacan, Sinaloa, cartel leaders were reportedly scrambling. Sources told federal agents that the arrest of Judge Welland had created panic within the organization. Communications had gone dark. Operatives were being pulled back. Safe houses were being abandoned. The cartel knew that Judge Welland had information, names, locations, plans, and they knew he might talk. Federal prosecutors were already preparing to offer him a deal, cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. But whether he would take it remained to be seen. The scope of the corruption extended into the financial sector. Investigators discovered that Judge Welland had been laundering money through real estate. He owned properties in Minneapolis, Phoenix, Miami. Each property was purchased through a shell company, each transaction designed to hide the source of the funds. Federal agents were now seizing those properties. They estimated the total value at over $50 million. All of it would be forfeited to the government. The raid also exposed vulnerabilities in the immigration court system. Judge Welland had been appointed to the bench during a period of rapid expansion. Background checks had been rushed. Oversight had been minimal. And once he was in place, there was little monitoring. He had free rein to make decisions, to rule on cases, to shape outcomes. And for 6 years he had